Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next webinar in our series for the USDA Food Safety Outreach Grant. Next slide, please. Today, we are going to be talking about logic models, and let's first acknowledge our funding agents. We are Texas Tech University, Alabama A&M University, and Iowa State University, who were granted this fund entitled Empowering Minority Serving Institutions Food Safety Specialists to Write Successful Food Safety Outreach Grants through Education, Training, and Technical Assistance. Next slide, please. This is our team. I am Angela Shaw here at Texas Tech University. We have Dr. Armitra Jackson at Alabama A&M University, Dr. Shannon Coleman at Iowa State University, and our grant guru, Dr. Christine Strohm. Today, Dr. Strohm is going to walk us through logic models, how to make them impactful and make sure that they are award-winning. So I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Angela. We will, first of all, introduce what is a logic model. Then we will discuss why it is important. And then for most of the presentation, I will walk you through how to create it with the information that you already have in your first draft or in your concept paper for the program manager. So, what is it? And why do we use it? A logic model is basically a typically one-page representation that outlines the logical relationships between the different components of your project. It's a systematic and structured way to present all the key elements of your proposed project, including what goes into it, the inputs, what you will do, the activities, what will be the results, the outputs, and what may happen after the project is finished, the outcomes, and how they relate to your stated goals. Logic models are commonly used in program planning, implementation, and evaluation to help stakeholders understand and communicate the expected connections between the program resources, activities, and the intended outcomes. What is it used for? Logic models, once they're well done and meaningful, help researchers and planners clarify the purpose of the project that they're pursuing, identify the key components, and establish a roadmap for the implementation of different aspects of the project. By mapping out these logical connections between all these elements, the researchers can ensure that project activities align with the intended goals, that what we are doing will logically lead to achieving the stated goals. As a planning tool, the logic model clarifies the sequence of outcomes and the relationship between activities and specific outcomes. It helps you, as the person who develops the proposal, to examine and refine what you want to achieve, the mission, the vision that you have for your project, to identify your goals and objectives, and preferably you do that with your team and your stakeholders, so everybody has a word and input into the development of this very important tool. Identify the most important desired outcomes, identify the critical path that you have to take to reach those, identify existing, additional, weak or strong components of the program and ways to enhance the whole performance. In other words, when you put this together and you realize we need a person with a specific expertise and we don't have that person on the team, this is the time to either retailor your project so you don't need that person, or retailor your project so you include somebody who can do the work that has to be done in order to make this logic model, this project, work. Much of the benefits of going through this elaborate process of putting all these bits and pieces together comes from the dialogue that you have with your collaborators, with your stakeholders, and collecting input from all sides. That will make your whole project much stronger. It also makes sure that everybody has a word and feels heard in the development of the project, and you get buy-in from everybody who needs to contribute to the success of the project. Who else will look at it? Who else will get something out of it? Well, funding agencies and donors get something out of it. If you submit to foundations, they typically require a logic model. They need, or they require it because it makes it easy for them to understand your project's theory of change, what you assume will happen once you do or achieve something. They can easily see the expected outcomes and how resources will be allocated. It helps funding agencies, the program officers, to make informed decisions about what to fund, and then in the future to assess progress of your project and feasibility of certain steps within your project. Program managers and implementers, here we go. For them, it serves as a guide during the implementation period of your project to make sure that you are on track, that you're reaching certain milestones, that you're achieving certain steps within this roadmap that you have laid out in the logic model. And by understanding these relationships between inputs, activities, and outcomes, program staff can make informed decisions, allocate resources, and monitor your progress effectively. The same basically applies to evaluators, whether you have a voluntary evaluator or whether there is a request for an independent evaluator that is listed in your RFA. They use the logic model as a framework to design their evaluation plan, to select indicators for success, and again, to assess the effectiveness of your project. The logical structure that you provide facilitates the development of appropriate evaluation questions and the identification of data sources that will flow into the evaluation plan to write reports and communicate both with the team and with the funding source whether you are on track. To facilitate formative evaluation, that is evaluation that happens throughout, not just at the end of funding periods, but throughout the project, the evaluator should be identified very early in the proposal development process, so they can inform the writing team to help them identify measurable metrics that then later will be used in the formative evaluation process to give you continuous feedback to help you improve the communication between team members, flow of information inside the team and to the outside, all these things that will be part of the evaluation process. If you work a lot with stakeholders and community members, then logic models are a very easy way to convey to them what you want to do and how you want to do it and what you see as the goal, the outcome at the end. Nobody has to read 10, 15, 20 pages. By just looking at this one page, everybody of your stakeholder community will be able to understand what's going on because there is no jargon in the logic model. It's very condensed and concise, and it makes it very easy to follow step by step what you're planning on doing. And not to forget, by conveying these important pieces easily, you make it obvious to your stakeholders, donors, that you are transparent, and that you put emphasis on making sure that they understand what's going on. You're building trust, and that is important. So what is the goal of the logic model? The logic model has to answer 4 important questions. Where are you coming from? In other words, what is the problem that you want to solve? What will you invest? What will you throw at the problem in order to solve it? How will you get to where you want to be? What will you do? And what will you produce, your deliverables? And what will happen once you arrived at your destination? What will be the longer term impact of your work? So, in other words, you have to sit down with your team, with your stakeholders, and identify clearly in very few words, and you will see why you don't have much space. What is the problem or the situation? What resources are available to support our effort? What are our assumptions, our theory of change? What are the activities and measurable outputs of our work? What are the short, medium, and long-term impacts of these results? What is the overarching goal of our work? And what could happen outside of our influence that can jeopardize what we're doing? So here is the template that the USDA actually provides for a logic model for USDA projects. And this looks very complicated, and you probably cannot read what's in there, but I added the link to the website. You can download it. This is a Word document. You can write into it when you create your own logic model. The blue text in here are actually explanations for what is expected to be in these boxes. And because this now all sounds very abstract and you know, so what? I started out by pulling each of these boxes and filling them with input for an imaginary USDA project that deals with creating better, more specific weather predictions for farmers and ranchers to be more successful. That's the overarching thing. So here is the situation. This is the problem. Growers need more accurate, high-resolution weather and climate information to improve yields and profitability. The spatial resolution of weather data currently provided has not improved over decades. To reach the increased quality and yields necessary to meet national and global food needs by 2050, it is essential that specialty crop producers have access to more accurate and reliable weather data. Where do you typically find a description of the situation? You find it on the first page of your proposal, where you start with the identification of the problem and its significance. That's where you pull this piece and shorten it, make it just keywords, and put it in here. Next piece in our template from the USDA is the input, the list of inputs. And that can vary depending on what you are doing. In this case, we put in Farm Bill funding. That's USDA money that will flow into this project. There was private expertise that was brought into the project by companies. And then there's stakeholder involvement by farmers and growers. Then there's, in this case, institutional support, existing RAS sites. There was a model that was implemented here, Fox Weather, several universities involved, and a group of specialty crop growers. Then the team as such that will work on that, multidisciplinary team of scholars in the social, biological, and physical sciences, extension experts and educators, industry partners, and specialty crop grower representatives. These were all collected here. One thing that can go in here for bigger projects are advisory boards, for instance. They are typically listed in this column of inputs. Angela, whenever you have something to add, please just pop up and throw something in.
Well, I was going to add that sometimes I put in this section any specialty equipment that I have as an input. So you have to think about what are you going to do and what is needed to do that. So sometimes it's easy to put a actual university, but sometimes specialty tool equipment that you have or services you have or offices you have. I think about when I do education grants, it's important for me to include in our student services. So depending upon what you need and you're inputting into this, that's what you put here. And every input section looks different per grant. So don't just copy and paste this from one grant to another. It has to be very specialized to your call.
Yes. Next column we're looking at are our assumption, our theory of change. What do we predict will happen once we fulfill the goals of our project? Here, or I have a bunch of definitions that we can look at first. Assumptions are the beliefs we have about the project and the resources involved. They include the way we think the project will work. That's the theory of change we have used to develop the project. They are reflected in the research questions that are typically listed in our research plan or plan of work. Over the course of your project, you want to regularly revisit and validate your assumptions because you may gain information or knowledge early on that could slightly change your assumption. You may have to pivot a little bit. And that's why it's important to have this baseline logic model assembled early on and then revisit once you see that certain things were not quite the way you were assuming they would be. So here in our example, the effectiveness and acceptance of existing technologies and decision support tools can be increased by using data with higher spatial resolution and forecast accuracy than currently available. Intensive communication with stakeholders throughout the project will result in a high level of utilization of the project's outputs. So they will be new models, and the team assumed that once this model is created and validated, it will see widespread acceptance from stakeholders. Next piece in our logic model are outputs and activities, and they're often separated. Sometimes outputs and activities are listed together. And then there is a second column that talks about participation. Depending on what kind of project you are proposing here, this will vary. And you have freedom to put in here what is important as a deliverable of your specific project. So activities are the events that we undertake to produce desired results. That's what we do. If your project plan says we will hold 16 webinars, or we will perform 25 farm visits, that's what goes into the activities and output section here. Examples: create state-level partnerships, train healthcare partners, develop community health communication campaign, all these things. But what is important and what's not well represented in my example, preferably you put a number to it, because that's what makes outputs measurable. So in my example, I have done this here. On the research and project development side, I have surveys for 7 different crops and 5 regions. I increase the resolution of weather data from 1 square kilometer to a 100th of a square kilometer. We fine-tuned the weather forecast in 1-day steps to 48 days in the future. We will conduct, or we plan to conduct, field trials with 64 growers. We will determine the differences in yield and quality between users and non-users. And we will share high-resolution data with existing platforms. And we will develop 3 new apps. All of this is measurable. On the technology transfer side, how we will disseminate and share our results, we have 7 workshops, a website that will be launched, weekly blog and podcasts, 25 videos created, 3 30-minute webinars created, a 1-day national workshop, 30 presentations, and you see how all of this is measurable. That is the important piece in the output section, that it's not just dream, it is hard fact.
And one thing that I would add is when I do integrated grants under USDA, sometimes out of my outputs, I have education, extension, research as my columns.
Yes.
Because each of those, one thing that they always say with the integrated is they want to make sure that you have equal balance of budget. A lot of times they say one category can't be more than 2/3 of the budget. Well, this is the showcase. This is a great place to showcase where you're putting all your eggs. It should be balanced if it's integrated, or if you're just doing a research and extension, you can have categories of all your outputs for the research, all your outputs for your extension and outreach. So these categories could be, but it's a great way to also display your outputs in that way. So I just wanted to add that.
And again, this highlights what Angela said earlier. All of this in a logic model has to be tailored to your specific proposal that you're writing in response to a specific call. So you can use a template as the format, but the content will be different for each and every grant in every column. Okay, our next column will cover the outcomes and impacts. And this is something that I want to highlight, because a lot of times PIs use the word or the terms output and outcome synonymously, and they're not the same. Outputs is what we achieve. We do work, and at the end of the work, we have output. That is immediate. Outcome are the desired results of the project. This is what we hope to achieve in the medium or longer term. So that is something that goes towards your goal. Outcomes and impacts represent the changes, effects, or benefits that are expected to result from your project. They typically do not happen within the funding period. It will happen after the funding period. Typically, they are categorized in 3 separate categories: short, medium, and long term, which can be a little bit of a hassle, because how do you determine which falls where? So I prefer to just look at short term. That is more or less immediately after, or even sometimes towards the end of my funded project, and long term, which will happen afterwards, which is really just the piece that we hope to achieve. So here I have combined short and medium term outcomes, more accurate weather climate data to guide crop management decisions, access to a suite of data for improving crop management recommendations, savings in dollars for growers by having better information and making science-based decisions. So this is not something that will be that somebody can measure during your project, that an evaluator can see. This is typically afterwards. Long term, these are the intended effects that occur over time, probably over years, changes in behavior and practice. Sustained changes that occur beyond the immediate outputs of the project. These impacts are closely related to the goals that you stated earlier and the objectives that the USDA seeks to achieve through its initiatives. They reflect the broader systemic changes that may take time to materialize, but have significant and lasting effects. Long-term impacts have significant implications for the well-being of individuals, communities, or ecosystems. They represent meaningful improvements or advancements in key areas, for example, food security, environmental sustainability, economic development, public health, social equity, but it could also include education, broader participation. You can really, depending on what kind of proposal you're writing, this will be tailored to what you want to achieve. Here, the longer term impact in my example are growers' capacity to prepare for and adapt to weather and climate impacts is strengthened, so they're better prepared for the changes that are coming. Growers will achieve higher yield and better quality and consequently higher profits, while at the same time imposing a lower negative environmental impact on their land and on the environment in general. And it will enable the U.S. specialty crop growers to meet national and global food needs as they are predicted for the future. That is one of the goals of the USDA. And that's why it pops up here, because you want to make sure that your long-term impact are closely aligned with what the USDA wants to achieve in this particular program. Then our overarching goal, that should also be very strongly aligned with the goals and priorities. And basically what I often do is I look at the call and what the goal of the call is, of the program, the funding program, and I tailor it to make it the overarching goal of the project. So what you see here in this oval is basically taken out of the RFA. And now when we put all this, oh, wait, one more thing, external factors. That is one extra piece in the logic model that details potential limitations, things that can go wrong that are outside of your control. In your case, say food safety, if the USDA changes its priorities and no longer supports food safety projects, that will jeopardize your project and you will not be able to do anything about it. So everything that's outside your control, but could happen, you should be aware of it. And that's what this piece here says. Technology may advance faster than the PIs predicted. There may be tools coming online and available that were not available when this project was conceived, and they may have to respond to that and implement what has come up out of other sources. And this project is dependent on web-based platforms, but these platforms are not evenly resourced and not everybody has access to them. So that is a pitfall that needs to be addressed and is not necessarily under the control of the PIs. Angela?
So I love this section because it talks about laws and regulations as well that may affect you, as well as disease. So I think about if you're dealing with animals or crops, you might want to think of what might be devastating. And so we're in the midst of the avian influenza epidemic. So if, I have a project right now with poultry, it was put to a halt over a year ago because we can't raise because of the likelihood. So things like that, you need to make sure that you put into here If it has to do with specific populations, that may change. Think about that, weather events, things like that, that you know, and it's also good to highlight that you've thought outside. So the pitfalls and limitations are part of your grant anyway. So it's a matter of pulling, and hopefully you guys are seeing that your grant, you're pulling this information for your logic model. And if you're not pulling it, you have to say, why isn't it in my actual written text?
That's a very good point. And it depending on how you prefer to go about putting this proposal together, whether you start with the logic model and then write your proposal, or whether you write your proposal first and then prepare the logic model, you have to make sure that they match, that what you said in the logic model is reflected in the text and vice versa. So all the elements in the logic model are relevant and will be checked by reviewers in your proposal text. So they should show up there again. I think now we have filled all the boxes in the USDA's template, and this is what it will look like once it is put together on one page. The only thing I did not cover is the evaluation plan, but because that's not always required. If it is required, you put it right in the middle here and you say formative or summative, what is the evaluator going to do? Data collection, analysis, reporting. So that's pretty standard to put in the middle. But here you see the whole logic model that looked so very confusing when we opened the template. Now it is filled with meaningful input. Here is another example, and I put it in because it has so much measurable input, so many data pieces that I, as a reader, can follow and can assess and put into relationships, that it makes it very compelling. This is the logic model for a very high value proposal. So several tens of millions of dollars. And that's why it is pretty crammed. You see, there is no separate lines for each input here. Everything that's been said is only separated by a little dot because so much had to be crammed in here. This also reflects that this big proposal had several goals. In the activities and outputs, you see goal 1 and goal 2 and goal 3. So for all these different goals, different things had to happen and had to be listed here. Study it, look at it. It gives you insight into what all can go in here. One example is the input section. Here, expertise, advisory boards, USDA funding is in here. Infrastructure, all the stuff, equipment, labs, entrepreneurial programs, preliminary data, everything is in here. And then everybody who is in the team, not just the researcher, but other people, NGOs, federal, state, business partners, everything is crammed into this one page.
One thing I want to add and just caution you, even though it's one page, sometimes we want to use abbreviations and all of that within it. We want to try and limit that as much as possible because people should be able to just read it and understand and not have to be like, what does FS or FSMA mean? Or, you know, they may not be familiar with some of the terms and acronyms that you're using, and abbreviations you're using. So you have to be mindful of that as well when you're doing this, because this might be the only thing they look at outside of your first page. And you don't want them to be like, I have no clue what they're talking about in this.
Yeah. And here in this example, there's only one acronym that not everybody may be familiar with, and that is down here. Hopefully you didn't even see it, the AD. That is the only acronym that's in here. So it's an example of how a very big project with a lot of people and a lot of activities can be condensed on one page and be meaningful and convey what it is that you want to do. So, important. Everything in this logic model has to flow logically. Everything is interconnected. The achievements of short-term outcomes contribute to the attainment of intermediate and the cumulative effect of the long-term impacts. So everything has to flow logically. You cannot come up with something out of the blue in the impact section that was not mentioned or even tangentially related to what happened before. This all has to flow organically and logically. Best practices when putting together a logic model: talk to your colleagues, talk to your team members, get input from your stakeholders, work closely with all of them so they buy into it. So once you get the money, you are all on the same page because you developed this piece together. This is your work contract. You all agreed that this is what you want to solve, this is what you want to do, this is what you want to achieve in the long term. The same for stakeholders. Don't underestimate the people that you want to create meaningful tools or help for. They are the best to tell you what they actually need. You may have an idea of how to improve the life of dairy farmers, but they may disagree with you. They may want something very different. So get this input from your stakeholders very, very early in the process and implement it into your planning. Clearly define all the components. Don't be wishy-washy about things. The fewer words you use, the better. Make keywords do a good job because people just scan across the page. They don't want to read a novel. They are expecting bullet points. Use specific and measurable terms to describe especially your outputs and your activities. Use consistent terminology. In big teams, sometimes tasks are split. One person writes the situation piece, one person writes the activity piece, one person writes the outcomes, or one person is research, one person is education. Make sure you speak in one voice when you put all these pieces together. And my last line here, all terms are well defined and understood by all stakeholders. So no acronym salad that jumps from one jumbled letter salad to the next. So don't do it. It is counterproductive for what you want to achieve here. Validation of your assumptions. We talked about that earlier. Regularly go back and revisit and make sure that what you are doing today still either matches your assumptions or that things have changed over 2 or 3 years and you have to adjust your assumptions. Always make sure that everything is aligned with your overarching goal. Measurable indicators, especially for outputs. This allows for effective monitoring and evaluation. Ensure that all the indicators, all the numbers that you put in there are realistic and feasible, so you don't run into big problems later. And don't be too cautious either by saying, well, if I say 10 webinars and then we only get 8 together, or I say we visit 64 farmers and then we only visit 58. That's not a big problem. You can explain that in your annual report and you can offer remedies, initiatives to make up for what was missed in the previous reporting period. That is not a big deal. The other thing you can do by hedging and by being careful, we will visit several farmers. Reviewers pick that up immediately and perceive that as you not being convinced yourself or not committed enough to put a number in the logic model or your proposal. So be realistic, but also be confident. If you don't believe in this project, you cannot expect that somebody else will believe in it. This is a link to additional material and to opportunities to practice. You can go online and start putting together a logic model and get feedback. So if you want to practice this or you want to use it for your next project, go and look at what the University of Wisconsin has done here. So now we're ready for questions.
Well, as we wait for questions, you've touched on a lot of things that you've seen, some of the missteps that people have done, but you've been doing this a long time. So
Yes.
what other tips or tricks would you say you commonly see when a researcher like myself submits to you our first logic model?
Let's start in the first column, the situation. A common mistake is to put in that first column what you want to do. That's not what should be there. You should clearly outline the existing problem and preferably, again, in measurable terms. Specialty growers lose $15 billion annually because they don't have accurate prediction of frost occurrence or something like that. That makes the significance of the situation of the problem more visible to the reader who is not a specialty crop grower. So that is the first thing that can go wrong. The next thing that often goes wrong is people just list their tasks in the activity section rather than the deliverables. I don't want to know that you will develop seminars. I want to know how many. So that measurable term that has to go in there, that's often missing. And then on the end part, people don't go back into the RFA to pull the overarching goal of the funding agency into it. That's another one. And here's another rule of thumb. And I do these logic models a lot. I actually start at both ends. I know what the overarching goal should be. That's in the RFA, so I can put that in there. My PIs have described to me, hopefully, what the problem is that they want to solve. That's the situation. I know pretty much what they're going to throw at it. Money, stakeholders, all these equipment, land, whatever it is. That is your input. Now I have to basically pin my PIs down on the measurable pieces, the deliverables of their activities. And then we can talk about what is closer to their goals, these more immediate and more closely related to their work outcomes. So that's how I assemble a logic models from the outside in.
I love that. And I'm over here laughing because, when we write grants, we have to be realistic. And a lot of times we have very big hopes on what we're going to do. But over the years, I've worked to tailor it down. But also with that, we're going to give the reminder of the importance of the closeness to your research plan we talked about yesterday. And next week, we're going to talk about your budget. So there has been many times I have written grants and they say, number one, for the amount of money or for the amount of time, you're trying to do too much. There's no way, even with your team, you can do all of that. And I know you are writing it in, but they're not convinced. So also the logic model could be a place where you really look at it and say, I have 2 years to do this. Can I really do this in 2 years or 3 years?
And here's another thing, Angela, that I see in in reviews typically, because I don't see budgets when I help people put these proposals together. Reviewers pick up on, you're saying you're creating a website in your logic model, but you have no money in your budget for it.
Yes, or you have a whole lot of collaborators on this. And so people are, and one thing that USDA is very mindful of is paying people for their time. So if you have an advisory board, a lot of times they want to see honorariums in there, or maybe matches of their time in there. They're very mindful of the use of people and making sure they're being paid. So you can have a PI that's going to be doing 3 objectives of this, and they have no graduate students and they have no time on the grant. So how are they possibly going to do this work if the budget's not aligning with the outputs and the outcomes that you have put in there? And I say outcomes also because those short-term ones, depending upon the length of your grant, you may be able to touch some of those outcomes. If you have a 5-year grant and you're getting things done in the first year, you have plenty of time to do an outcome out of it, a knowledge assessment, a 1-year, 2-year follow-up based on you giving something to a group. You have time. Now, you're not going to have time for the long term, the 5 years out, but you could have some of that depending upon the length and that being objective. Does anybody in the group have additional questions?
Use the chat, put your questions in the chat, and we can hopefully address them.